But as you know better than me, the fact is he was prepared to use chemical weapons on his own people. He kills literally thousands of them every year.
Mr. Blair, he is ready to use chemical weapons again now to sacrifice all Iraqi people for his own power. He will do anything to stay in the power, and you know that very well.
Yeah, but if
you go for war with him, he will use these chemical weapons on his own people. He will destroy all Iraq to stay in the power.
Yeah, but isn't that an indication that he is that evil? Isn't that a reason why it's important that he is disarmed of these weapons?
We'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll be asking the Prime Minister why he's given such unswerving support to the American president. Is he George Bush's poodle? Welcome back. Ever since the outrage of September 11, Tony Blair has given staunch support to President Bush in the war against terror. But now there's considerable doubt about whether the war against Iraq is in Britain's interest. So much so that the Prime Minister has been referred to as George Bush's poodle. Prime Minister, that's not very pleasant, isn't it? What do you say to that?
I think you get used to being called all sorts of things in politics, some worse than poodle, actually.
But the point is that this is, frankly, not a war of our making, really. No. This is not our war, is it? This is America's war.
No, it's the whole of the international community's challenge, right, to decide whether we meant what we said last November. Look, I'm the person who took this back through the United Nations. When people wanted to go to war last summer, I said, no, you've got to give the UN and the international community a chance to work on this. It came together and it said certain things. It said, 1, he is a threat. 2, he's got to be disarmed. 3, this is his final opportunity to do it.
Would we have done it on our own, then?
Well, we didn't do it on our own. We did it with the UN. Now, either we meant what we said last November, in which case we have to follow it through, or, fine, we didn't mean what we say. But I did.
Let's hear from Jane Bennett here. So I'll come back to you.
Yes, well, you say we're doing it with the Americans. My husband's American, so we have lots of family and friends in America, and not one of them is with Bush on this, just like we feel that the British public aren't behind you. So I think it's completely unrepresentative to say that we are doing it with America. It seems that Bush and you, Mr. Blair, are doing it.
Well, I don't think actually I said we're doing it with America. I mean, we will do what is necessary to do because we passed that UN resolution last year, and it's not a question of doing it because it's America, although I should say to you, I am proud of the relationship we have with America, and I think it's an important relationship for this country, and I think it would be very unwise if we cast it aside. But that's not the reason I'm doing it. The reason I'm doing it is that I think it's right for us and for the international community to take a stand on this issue now, because if we don't take a stand now, we will find that the next challenge in this area that we meet will be far more difficult to meet. And if there's one thing surely we have learned as a country in our history, is if you don't face up to these things first time round, you have to return to them later, usually in far worse and more bloody circumstances.
Let's hear from Helen Sam.
My question is, when you joined the Labour Party, did you think that you'd end up sending B-52s over to Iraq? Did you think that you'd cause the biggest demonstrations against your policy ever to have been seen in the world? You're going to see millions on the streets the Saturday after you start bombing Iraq. You're probably going to split your own party. And you're spending billions on this war. When I'm from NUS, and you've said since 1997 that there's no money for education, there's no money for decent hospitals, but there's a bottomless pit when it comes to war. Is this what a Labour Party Prime Minister should be doing?
We are spending a very great deal of money on education and health, far more in 1 year on the National Health Service than the whole of the war would cost. So, I mean, let's get it in perspective and be reasonable with each other. Look, no, of course I don't want to be in a situation where either the Labour Party is divided or the country's divided. But we have an issue and we have to resolve it. And what I'm trying to say to you, and as I say, I mean, I'm aware, in fact, I won't convince you, but I'm trying to say to you, however strongly you feel about your position, it is sometimes necessary, I'm afraid, to say things that people don't want to hear as well as things that people do. And you know, we have seen in this country, for example, over the past few months, we've had, not just in this country, right around the rest of Europe, arresting these terrorist groups who are already trying to use chemical and biological means to get across the damage that they want to do to people. I simply say to you, and this is my honest assessment, if we don't deal with this issue now, if we allow Iraq to carry on developing these weapons, and then other countries will get the message that they can do it too, there will come a point in time when these two threats come together, and the devastation in the world then will be immense, and people will then look back and they'll ask people like me, why, when you saw the threat and acknowledged it, did you do nothing?
Prime Minister, let's look at the critical issue of a second UN resolution. According to a poll, and this time it's a poll of men and women, support for the war would increase to 71% if you did get that second resolution. Without it, it falls to about 22%. You desperately need that second resolution. You desperately need those votes, don't you?
I want to do it, yes, through the UN. And I want to do it not just for political reasons, actually, but because I think the authority of the UN's at stake.
What's the sort of going rate for a vote in the Security Council these days? How much are people paying?
Well,
How much are people being offered?
you know, you say, all I can say to you is I've had conversations with all the leaders on the Security Council, and I've not been talking to them about money or financial packages. The idea that somehow this is being done by sort of bribery and all the rest of it, it isn't. I'm afraid in the end, it's a question of working out where people want to stand on this. And I'm doing my level best to persuade them that the UN, having said that Saddam must disarm, should carry through its mandate. Now, you can believe all the conspiracy theories that you like. It's like the stuff about all this is to do with oil and everything. People can believe it if they want to believe it. It isn't true.
Mr. Blair, if we don't get the second resolution, and I know you're working extremely hard, you've been telling us you've been working on the phone over the weekend and even today about it. If we don't get the second resolution and we're in tow to America, are we going to go to war without it? We've already heard your Cabinet Minister, Claire Short, saying that she will not support you. The vast majority of the country will not support you without that second resolution. If we don't get that second resolution, are we still going to go to war? That's my question.
First of all, we're not going to do anything in tow to America. Secondly, I've said all the way throughout, before we have the vote on the resolution, it's not very sensible to start speculating on what's going to happen if, and what if this happens and what if that happens. I'm working flat out to get it. You know, as I sit here now, I'm still confident that we can get it. I think that people do understand Saddam has got to disarm voluntarily, otherwise force has got to be used. And I think what people are asking us to do is to define more precisely for them what it is that would allow us to say, yes, he is cooperating, or no, he's not. Now, that is a reasonable thing that they're saying to us, and we're working on that now.
Aren't we entitled to know whether you will go to war if, I mean, I know you're trying to get a second resolution, but if you don't, aren't we entitled to know whether you will still go to war? Aren't people entitled to know that?
Well, I've set out the circumstances and talked about...
But you wouldn't say whether you will or will not?
Well, I don't think at the very moment when we're negotiating this, it's very sensible to speculate on that.
So you can't give us a guarantee that if you don't get those 9 votes, you wouldn't go to war?
I'm not going into the business of guarantees this way or guarantees that way. What I'm saying to you is we're working flat out for the second resolution, and I'm not, by speculating on it, going to do anything that endangers our possibility of getting it. But if you want to know, I think there are countries moving our way, and I think the outstanding issue for many countries is that they want to know what it is we mean by saying he fully cooperates or he doesn't.
Sorry, how are you going to measure that?
Well, that's the very thing that we're working on. Because, I mean, let me just give you one example. One example would be, in the resolution 1441, we provided for the ability to take witnesses out of the country. So far, he's refused to let any of the witnesses leave the country. Now, that would be some demonstration. See, so it's things like that.
I think he needs more time. I think Hans Blix needs more time. He's asking for months, Prime Minister. He's not asking for years.
Let's hear from Charlotte Jones.
The second resolution, as far as I'm concerned, this war will still not be legitimate, even if you get a second resolution. I wish you would spend more time on negotiation. I admired your policy, and still admire your policy, on Northern Ireland. I think that is the way to deal with terrorism. Terrorists need to be talked with, listened to. You know, terrorists are appalling. We all agree with that. There's no letting them off the hook. But you've done this with Northern Ireland. It was brilliant. It's fantastic. It needs to be done here. We have a huge problem now, this massive polarisation of the Muslim world and the Western world, and we're sitting here in the middle of it as ordinary people of this country in terror. I'm so afraid of this racism. I'm so afraid of this demonising of these people. I desperately want you to sit down and talk to them like you talk to the IRA, and begin to hear them and begin to understand the causes of terrorism.
In respect to Northern Ireland, I mean, I think that is an interesting point because it's the difference. You've got 2 interesting parallels out of Northern Ireland. The first is, you had a group of people there with whom you could negotiate. There is no negotiation possible with the Al-Qaeda terrorists. I mean, their demand is that every state turns itself into a Taliban fundamentalist state.
You rescued a situation. Everybody, I mean, you know, I've been alive 38 years, and I remember all through the 70s, I was going, oh no, you can't possibly negotiate with Northern Ireland. Hopeless, hopeless, unresolvable. You started a resolution. You said we can negotiate where everyone said you couldn't.
And
this is an opportunity for you to make a statesman-like act. I'm looking to you for that. I voted for you as well, twice. I won't again unless you start to make moves in a statesman-like way, like the French, like the Russian, like Nelson Mandela.
If I think there is a negotiated way through, I'll take it. And that's the reason why I put the inspectors back into Iraq.
Okay?
Keep trying, please keep trying.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take a break now, but when we come back, we'll be asking the Prime Minister about the consequences of war. Necessary action or dangerous folly?
Any Iraqi deaths being acceptable, you try and limit civilian casualties as much as you can. And I have absolutely no intention of undertaking action that's going to kill thousands of innocent Iraqis.
But you've had discussions with American generals and so on. You've had discussions with politicians in America. I mean, when this thing is talked about, does anybody speculate about how many people might die? Not because you purposely set out to kill them, but how many might die? What, 5,000?
No, what you do is you make sure that the targets that you select are the military targets, and that's exactly what we're trying to do.
But nobody talked about civilian casualties for 5,000?
No, you talk about how you limit civilian casualties as much as possible.
So we'll limit it to what, 5, 10,
no,
15?
Look, you go into it with the aim of ensuring that there are as few civilian casualties as possible. It is true that in any conflict, I'm afraid, innocent people do die. That happened when we went to war in Kosovo, that happened when we went to war in Afghanistan, although it was a lot less than people said and thought might happen.
But is there
and we will do
price
everything we can. No, of course, there's no acceptable price.
But is there ever a price which is too high to pay in civilian lives? Is there ever a price which is too high to pay in civilian lives?
Well, what you do is you try to make sure that the military action that you undertake minimizes the potential for civilian casualties, which is why in the planning that we're doing, we're trying to make sure that we target the military infrastructure and the things that keep the Saddam regime propped up rather than the Iraqi people. And, you know, look, we had exactly these debates when we undertook the action in Afghanistan, and people were accusing us of sort of carpet bombing Afghanistan. We didn't do anything of the sort. We targeted as much as possible on the military infrastructure of the Taliban. We would do exactly the same in relation to the Iraqi regime, if we get to that stage.
Let's hear from Hannibeth Luke, who has some experience of terrorism because her boyfriend was killed in Indonesia.
Yes, Mr. Blair, I've come from Australia to show you this photograph of Mark Cajado and myself. This photo was taken on the 11th of October last year, the night before the Bali bomb. We were both in the Sari Club. Mark was killed and I've made it out, but I saw the carnage. I've seen the devastation and I've seen the suffering that results. I've seen all this. I've seen the suffering that results with families in Australia and in England. I heard the thud of Mark's father's knees as he fell to the floor when I told him over the phone his son was dead. This is the consequence of one bombing in Bali. Do you really want to support Bush and go into this war with Iraq and subject so many more innocent Iraqi families, regardless of how accurate your bombs are? They will be hurt, they will be, and they will go through the same pain that I've seen. Do you really believe this is justified? And I also believe they're going to become more desperate and therefore they are going to resort to more terrorism. Do you not believe this is going to be a consequence of the war on Iraq? More innocent young men like Mark will be targeted. Will be killed.
There's nothing I can say to take away the pain that you feel in this situation. But
I'm not asking you to take my pain away.
I know, but I'm just saying that right at the outset. But the reason why I'm taking this action is that my worry is if the terrorists are able to get hold of even worse material than they used in the bomb in Bali, you could be talking not about several hundred people dying, but several thousand people dying, perhaps even more than that. And that's why I'm doing it. Look, who would want to be in the position of going to war? But if I actually believe and genuinely believe that there is a real risk, because we know these terrorist groups, the sort that perpetrated that atrocity in Bali, are trying to get hold of these weapons. If we don't take action against this threat now, the risk is not that innocent people die simply, but that they die on a huge scale. And that's what worries me. Now, there are no easy choices in this situation, and there is no, moral high ground that one side owns and the other side doesn't. But that's what I see every single day across my desk. I get reports of these terrorist groups, the sorts that are in Europe at the moment, the sorts that did that in Bali, although Bali had nothing to do with the war against terror.
Until we start asking these people why they hate us so much, we are not going to find out the causes of why this is occurring. These people are not using weapons of mass destruction. They are using weapons that are at their hands easily. They use planes to fly into the World Trade Center. They use fertilizer in Bali. These people are using their minds, not weapons of mass destruction.
Well, but if they could... Yeah, but surely, let's at least agree on one thing. If they could use a weapon of mass destruction, they would.
Okay, Trisha Bingley, you had your hand up.
Isn't there, there's other dangerous, very dangerous countries